this is Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where together we're going to create some awesome comics, because this is Making Comics 101. We're talking about inking this week. We did our first episode where I introduced some of the, the tools and things that you need and some of the different processes and things like that. But today I want to dive a little deeper and do a little bonus exercise and show you some of the techniques. So what I have here is a printout. This is a comic page that I illustrated digitally, and we're going to try some different inking techniques and some different tools on here. But the one thing that I just want to mention is a lot of this stuff, like anything else with drawing, is just going to take a lot of practice. I remember when I first started to teach myself how to ink, because at that time you couldn't get a hold of a lot of pencils. They just, it was kind of before the internet. So, nowadays you can go online and you can find probably some high-res pencils that you could print out and practice on. So what I did was I just blew up, I took a page from probably an X-Men, I think like a Jim Lee X-Men comics. This was back in the 90s. Blew it up, and it's in black and white, put some vellum over it, and then just started, tracing and just practicing, with the nibs and the brushes. And eventually I sort of moved on to just deciding that I was partial to the brush. So I'm more a brush inker, but I will kind of show you a little bit with the nibs and some of the other tools. The problem with that was that I was basically inking over already inked work. So it was like Scott Williams ink that I was going over. And the thing you want to understand when you're inking is that you're not just tracing, you're adding your own flair to it. You're bringing a lot of that life into the drawings, and you need to learn how to draw too. I mean, it really helps to be a decent draftsman if you're going to be a decent inker. So just knowing that, so let's get into it. First of all, I'm going to show you a couple of some of the different tools. Like I had mentioned before, we've got the crow quill here. Here's some different brushes. In addition to that, we've got these here, which are brush pens. And this is another brush pen too. This one is refillable. Also, we can't forget about like the microns. I use a variety of these for different reasons. For instance, a lot of times in my sketchbook, I will use these disposable brush pens. They're good for taking to either conventions or store signings, things like that, where you probably don't want to bring actual, ink, because it's going to could get knocked over and everything, and you're just not in the proper workspace to mess around with this. This brush pen here, it's refillable. This one's a little better, so I tend to use this, but I want to be careful. You want to be careful not to damage the nib. So sometimes I'll just bring these with me just on the go and everything when I'm out and about, and save this for something a little more, if I'm working on something maybe a little more precious. Usually for my comic pages, I stay away from the brush pens. I mean, you can do pretty well with brush pens, but for those, I still like to use just the brush and dip them in ink. And like I said, there is the crow quill, which definitely has its advantages. A lot of the best inkers, that's their tool of choice. I just never mastered it, but there's certain things that you can do better with this crow quill than you can do with anything else. Microns are great. I use them mostly for straight lines and laying out my panel borders. You can't get as much line weight, but that's also a look. Maybe you don't want a varied line weight in your drawing. It's all depending on your taste. You can get a varied line weight, but a lot of times it's just building up your lines with these microns. So I tend to use a brush for that, just so I can do it in a single stroke rather than kind of going over it over again, assuming that I want different line weights. And of course the microns do come in different thicknesses and everything. How about we start off with the crow quill? So I want to show you this here. So I don't know if we can see that, if you can see that well enough. I don't know if you can see how the tines kind of split apart when you do that. That's what creates the thickness of your stroke. The more pressure you add, the more those tines are going to split apart. I'm working on a flat surface right now. Some people work on an angled surface. A lot of people do prefer that, and sometimes that's probably better for your back to have a little bit of an angle. Typically, in my opinion, you don't want to tape your artboard down, because you're going to want to it's as much moving the paper or the page around as it is the brush or the, you know, whatever tool you're using. Because once we get into this, you're going to see you're going to be doing a lot of pulling and not as much pushing, and you're not always in the correct position to pull if your artwork is stationary. So because right now where I'm shooting this, I don't have a huge work area, I've just kind of cut out this version of this particular panel just so I can rotate a little easier. So that's the reason why I'm doing that. As with the brush, there's brushes, nibs, whatever, there's all kinds of tools that you can use to ink. There's also many different kinds of ink. I am partial to manga ink. I like Deleter Black. Number 4 is a matte, is sort of a matte finish. Number 5 is a little more glossy. I'm running out of the number 4, so I think I'm just going to use, for this demonstration, I think I'm going to use the number 5. There's also there's an acrylic ink, this Dr. P.H. Martin's Black Star. I like this ink as well. That's probably my backup. And then, you know, Speedball makes a pretty decent ink. The one that's probably easiest to find is Black Magic. I don't use it that often because it's a little inconsistent with its coverage and its actual, you know, blackness. So, you know, sometimes it seems like it gets a little watered down, especially nowadays. Try different inks out and see what works. Some of the more expensive inks, like the Deleter, and that's mostly because it's a Japanese ink. So these manga inks, they've got to ship them from Japan, so usually they get a little pricey because of the shipping and everything. So here's my crow quill. I believe this is a Hunts 102. I'm going to dip this far enough in the well that that vent or that little hole in there is submerged. Get enough ink on there, and the ink's not going to fall out, which, I mean, this may look like it's the wrong way, but it's the proper way, where the flat part is going to be facing up and the curved part is going to be facing down. It always helps to have, you know, a little sheet that you can, you know, a scratch page that you can kind of mess around with. Now, you can kind of see how this works. I'm just doing some feathering here. I'm pressing down hard right here to get it sort of thick, and then I sort of just real quickly let it kind of go out, and you can see how that line tapers. And that's sort of how you do some of the feathering. And of course, if you want to do like a cross hatching, you would just come from the other side and do that. I don't use a lot of cross hatching in my work, but I do want to just give you an idea how that's done. But the good thing with these crow quill nibs is, I mean, it's super sharp. I can get, even though, you know, it takes me a lot longer to ink with one of these, and I'm not as good as maneuvering it. I mean, if I am gonna do cross hatching, I'll go in here with this, and I mean, there's no better tool than this nib for this. I'm just not as good. I haven't really mastered maneuvering this around. But like anything else, it's just practice. If I would have just stuck to this and only used this, I'd be a lot better at it now. This guy here, he's got a lot of mechanical stuff. So let's see if I can, again, I'm gonna kind of turn that over. You know, I can get sort of a thin line there. But like I said, it's see how choppy that is? And just because I am not that familiar with the tool, if it's quick lines, I can do pretty well. So I mean, for that type of thing, like if I'm going to do these vents here on his costume, those I can do pretty well. Actually, I mean, I do prefer it. I mean, if I could just switch back and forth through different tools, I would probably use this definitely for things like vents and everything. Let's see if I can get some better control on this line here. So as you can see, I've even illustrated this with the pencil. It's got some different line weights in here. It starts off a little thin, gets a little thicker as you know, as you got to figure out where your light source is going, because it's going to be thinner where the light hits, and then underneath it's going to be a little thicker. So keep that in mind. So let's see if I still have ink in this brush. And then I'm going to try to get a little thicker and just kind of that. You know, I mean, it's I've done better inking jobs, but this, like I said, this isn't my tool of choice. But I do want to I do want to just sort of demonstrate it just to show you, because you may like this a lot better. And like I said, a lot of professional inkers, that's what they use. All right, so the other thing I wanted to show you with this nib, so here's my ruler, and it helps to have I think with the crow quills, it helps to have a little bit of like a finger grip. I've seen different styles. This triangular one seems to work pretty well. And the other reason why I like this triangular one is that this is my rolling ruler, and if you see, there's kind of a guide up here at the top, and it rests kind of nicely on here. So if I get some ink on there, I can rest that on there. Again, I had too much ink to begin with. This is why I don't do a lot of inking with that. But you can see how you can get straight lines with a little line, you know, a little bit of a more varied line than you get with a micron. But you can just kind of rest it on here and kind of drag it across. Now the other thing you want to have on hand is some water. So you can keep your brush clean. I usually keep something with the lid on it, just so, you know, just in case it won't spill and everything. And also you want to have either a rag or a paper towel, because you don't want that ink to dry up on that. The other thing, when you first get these nibs, sometimes it helps just to go over it real quick with like a match, because it's got like a little film on it, and sometimes the ink doesn't stick very well to that, or you can just wash it really good. All right, so let's move on to the brush, because like I said, that's sort of my tool of choice. So when it comes to brushes, I typically go with the Winsor & Newton Series 7. It's pretty standard for comic book inkers. This one is a 3, but I would probably recommend probably a 1. I think this may be an aught. So somewhere in the middle there, like a 1. If you do want to get super fine stuff, maybe an aught. I've even seen people use like a triple aught or double aught. But probably, I think a lot of comic book inkers use a 1. And the good thing about, say, even like a 1 or a 2 is that you can still get super thin lines if you're just using just the tip here and not pressing down so much. All right, so the other thing I keep on hand, this is something that I use. I keep a lot of these just water bottle caps, because unlike what I was talking about before with the nib, where you want to have that completely submerged so that little vent is covered with the brush, I don't tend to want to do that. So what I've also got these little pipettes, or you know, some inks do have an eyedropper. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and get some ink in this pipette and just drop it in here. And you don't need a lot. This ink goes a long way. Although if you do a lot of inking, I don't know if Deleter sells like larger larger things than this, because I go through these quite a bit, but you know, I typically do a lot of inking. Lately I've been doing more digital stuff. So anyway, so with this brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some ink on it. Now with the brush, I always go over here first to make sure I've got the right amount. So as I said, you want to kind of push, or I'm sorry, you want to kind of pull your ink. So I'm starting here, and then I'm just through here, and then of course underneath, like I said, I'm pressing down a little further, just kind of going over these lines. Got some of these thick lines. Now with this, I mean, you can kind of go in. Now when you're spotting your blacks or you're laying down black areas, typically you want to use a brush for that. And when I ink, usually, a lot of times I'll start on this side here, and then I'll just kind of move across. But sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. You just want to make sure that you're not going over your lines, and you're not going over your existing ink and smudging it. And sometimes it helps to have like a sheet of paper or whatever under your hand that can, or you know, if you've got a smudge protector glove, you can use that as well. Do a little bit of a thick line, and then I'm going to try to do just a little bit of pressure up here. And like sometimes you don't even have to connect the line. The line can kind of break up, because That just kind of indicates that it's a thin line, so sometimes they'll break. Then we get into some the more organic shapes, like his hand here. Just kind of go through here and then kind of trail it off a little bit. Again, pay attention to your light source. Underneath it's going to be thicker. Another thing that I talked about before in the video are contour lines, and sometimes instead of adding a lot of line weight, you may just want the outline of your character to be thick and the interior lines a little bit thinner. That's a technique I use quite a bit. I used to anyway. Especially when I do character designs, I tend to do that. So here you'll see right now I'm just sort of doing an outline. It's pretty much the same thickness, but when I go for the interior line, I'll go a little bit thinner. But we've got this glass dome here. Now that's a good area where, like I talked about before, where you might want to, have the line break if you want it to be sort of thin. And you can kind of do that. It just gives it, it gives it a nice effect, makes it look a lot lighter. Your eyes tends to fill in. They know that shape is connected. You're not going to look at that and say, oh, it must be broken. That glass must be broken. You get the idea. So anyway, we'll do a little bit of hair here. Again, the underside's going to be a little thicker with hair. With hair, I tend to go a little thinner. Tend to go a little bit faster. If you go real quick, you sort of get a little bit of a dry brush technique, which I love looking at dry brush. My work, I don't usually incorporate that much. I like more, straight lines, but I've experimented with it on certain books. But, so there you go. And then let's try some of these brush pins. Like I said, these are really good for just, portability. It's pretty much the same principle. And I imagine if I practice enough, sometimes I wonder if I just practice enough, if I could totally switch to just using a brush pen and not use the dip pen. But still, for certain comic projects, I want to use the actual brush. But you can get nice line weight and everything with these. So this is fairly inexpensive disposable model. Here, this is the refillable one. This one's pretty nice. Let's see. Yeah, not bad, not bad. I mean, these brush pens have come a long way. I mean, I don't remember having brush pens like this when I was, kind of first starting to learn how to ink. So they're definitely nice to have. And you can do pretty well with even some of the more mechanical type areas of your artwork. All right, so those are the brush pens, and of course, we've got microns. And for those, typically, like I said, I tend to use microns for, panel borders. So I'm here, I've got my rolling ruler. This is a number 8 micron. I don't know how much ink it has in it. But yeah. So I'll roll my borders out with that, but a lot of people do use the microns for illustrating. So there you go with that. Also, if we were going to go in here, a lot of my buildings and everything, Now, typically, if this was like a 2-point perspective, I could just line this up and I can go across, but you'll see how it doesn't line up because it's 3-point, so it actually, we're getting another point here. We talked about perspective in another video, but I can go in here and you can start off with a heavy hand. You can kind of get a little bit, even with the micron, it does react to pressure a little bit, and especially with buildings like here, I'm not pressing as much there. So you can get a little varied line weight even with the micron, and there are ways to break them, and maybe I'll do that in another video where you can get a lot of line weight to them, but it's a little tricky. So yeah, so those are the microns. But there are so many different tools and techniques for inking. I had another video that I did a while back with just inking art hacks where I showed, using a sponge, using splatter techniques, tips with like credit cards and masking and anything that you can use to get ink on a page, even wadded up toilet paper or whatever. There's just tons of different techniques that you can use, and just fun to experiment with all these different styles. Like I said, there's the wet brush technique, the dry brush technique. The possibilities are really endless. If you want to check out that video, I'll try to remember to put a link to that, but you can see some of the different techniques that you use. Also, paper has a big factor to play. This is a little, for inking, I tend to go with more of a hot press, which is a little bit smoother, like a vellum, Bristol paper. This actually is cardstock because it's like a cardstock. I think it's a hammer mill. It's thin enough that I can run through my printer, but it still does have some thickness to it. But also, of course, Bristol, either Strathmore or Canson, makes great paper. As far as ink, you want to make sure that you're using a permanent ink. Now, just because it is permanent doesn't mean that you can't do washes. Now, in comics are typically, pretty stark black and white, but from time to time people will use washes, meaning you can add water and get some gray tones in there. But the thing is, once they're dry, they're dry. So you can dilute it a little bit, but once it's dry, it's dry. Also, they are permanent, so you gotta be careful not to spill it because it will not come out of clothes or carpet. But yeah, with inking, it's a lot of experiment, a lot of just practice. Lately, like I said, I've been doing more digital inking in Clip Studio. I love the G-Pen, it's great. Also, I've got some of my own brushes and stuff that are in the Comic Maker starter kit and toolkit. You can try those out. There's Clip Studio and Photoshop brushes. So whether it's digital, whether it's traditional, just taking that pencil page and adding the dark black ink. I love looking at just black and white artwork. Obviously, the other thing we forgot to mention is, white ink. This is Deleter White #2. You can do all kinds of cool effects with that. But yeah, it's just a matter of experimenting, trying things out. But I'm curious what you guys use to ink. Do you use brushes? Do you use quills? Do you use microns? Or maybe something else? Like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just whatever works best for you. But you gotta experiment, you gotta try different things out. If you're new to inking, try it out. I would recommend, even before you do digital, try traditional inking and see if you like it. For me, it's therapeutic. I just love, I love that feel of the ink on the page. Probably one of my favorite aspects of drawing comics. So yeah, but that's gonna do it for today. Hopefully you got something out of this, and I will see you guys later. That is all. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.